if you're going to charter schools with the hope of avoiding the woke or avoiding the nonsense or avoiding the 12 feet distance and whatnot, that's not always going to be the case. Isn't that right?
No, that is absolutely right. And it's kind of funny. I think like our paths crossed in the night in this whole affair because, you know, how I kind of ended up in the public light doing this work is I wrote an article as a former Democrat about going to a Trump rally. It went viral on the internet. And a couple of days later, Jack, you were actually on Tim Pool's show. I think you were the first guest on his show at the time. It had just launched and my life was going crazy. It felt like a bomb got dropped in the middle of it. And I was just trying to relax, sit down, watch Tim Pool. And you happened to be on it and you were talking about when you that whole incident where you got fired from DC Charter Public School Board, and you didn't say who it was, but you said enough information where it dawned on me at some point. I was like, they're one of my clients. And it was the weirdest thing in the world. I had done several training sessions for their staff. Their HR person had brought me in. And I could tell that the staff was very, very woke just based on the questions that they were asking me. And when I had this realization that was the place that you had left, you know, it was instant that I said, oh my God, they're going to fire me based on me saying that Trump supporters are Nazis. And sure enough, a couple of months later, it was right after the pandemic started. And we were talking about the China virus, as it were, because that's where it came from. It came from China, as it turns out. And I got an email from the DC Charter Public School Board saying, Karlyn, you are just being a little too racist on Twitter, and we can't see fit to bring you back to do training with our staff if you're going to keep this up. But if you want to have a conversation about how you can be less racist, then we'll take that into consideration. And I emailed them back and I said, well, I knew this was going to happen as soon as I met Jack Murphy. I wish you all the very best.
Indeed, indeed. Well, that is a scary thing because, Corey, I want to know that charter schools are going to save the world, but they're infected. They're infected even at the authorizer level because this type of behavior. And let me just explain. At the District of Columbia Public Charter School Board, in their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee meetings, written on the board in English in big old text is the phrase, too many white people. We have too many white people working here. We need to change the color complexity of the organization, et cetera, and so forth. And it was like the furthest nth degree possible you could imagine. I mean, and this filters into the rest of the schools. How are we going to focus on the authorizers?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons why charter schools are still defined as quote unquote public schools because they're so heavily regulated by the government. In a lot of ways, they are kind of similar to the government, the purely government-run schools or the district-run schools, as a lot of people would like to call them. I would say the problem is less severe in charter schools because at least you can vote with your feet to a different school if you don't like what's going on in the charter school. But as far as the authorizers are concerned, there's ways to improve that in the charter school system. One way is to allow for multiple authorizers, to allow more charter schools to come into the market and compete with diverse types of setups. So that's one way to improve. And then another way, I mean, I think the best way to solve the problem is to enact ESAs instead, education savings accounts. Instead of telling people that you can choose this public school or this public school or this public charter school, allow people to just have the money follow them into an education savings account so they'd have a much more autonomy and power in the school system where they could choose the charter school if they want, they could choose the public school if they want, but now they would additionally be able to choose homeschool options and just be able to use the money to pay for those services, or they can choose to use it at a private school as well. So not a perfect solution, but it allows for more empowerment of families as opposed to just charter versus traditional.
Indeed. But the problem I think that we find is that time and time again, parents and regular folks who don't have the time to commit to studying these issues like we do, who are depending on the media and other folks to help them understand and make sense of the world, they have no idea the pernicious effect of the CRT stuff and how it's leading us down a terrible road. Chris, how do we find high leverage points? You know, like I've gotten information from people send me stuff about like this local elementary school here in, you know, local to me in like, say, Virginia. And it's great. We can blow them up. We can bring a lot of attention to their PTA meeting. Maybe they get maybe they change, maybe they don't. But how many elementary schools are there? right? How many different instances of this is happening all across the country? It seems futile to attack it at that most granular level. Where is the highest leverage point, and what are you doing to attack it?
Yeah, well, I think you need to operate on both levels. So those one-off stories are really important because they create a narrative. You can use them as examples to get it into the media. And I know that I've been doing these stories. I've been doing about one a week, and I'm averaging 20 million plus media impressions per story. So now have 100 million impressions on these stories in the last 3 months. This is literally changed the national conversation. So I think they're actually very important. But in many cases, I'll drop a bomb on the California curriculum. I'll drop a bomb on Buffalo Public Schools, et cetera, et cetera. They don't actually change their policies. I mean, they're getting hammered in their local press. They're getting hammered in the national press. But the political incentives and the political pressures are not there to actually make them change. But that's not really the goal. The goal is to really create a kind of air war narrative where you can actually have the American public saying, wait a minute, our schools have gone really wrong. You raise the question in their mind. What needs to happen next, and what needs to happen simultaneously, is that we actually attack the structures of power that give these institutions essentially immunity from having to change. And that's a lot of what Corey's talking about. And my own preference would be to figure out how to radically decentralize public bureaucracies and public institutions such as the school system, where instead of saying, we take tax money from the public and then we distribute it to the school district and they distribute it to the school, the individual schools, which is a top-down model, actually saying, what if we give every family $15,000 a year per child and then radically decentralize the options so that you have massive entrepreneurial growth? You have maybe traditional public schools that still exist. You have religious schools that now can expand. You have any kind of education that you want, just like restaurants, right? I don't go to the public restaurant and get a 2 cups of gruel every day. I can go to Thai food, Japanese food, Asian food, good food, bad food, whatever kind of food. And you have to trust that families know what's in the best interest of their kids. Ultimately, the public school system relies on a paternalistic model that assumes the ignorance and stupidity of their customers. You get one option because we don't trust you. I actually have a different view. I trust all families to make the best choice for them. It may not reflect my values, but who am I to say that everyone has to follow this specific set of ideologies and values? And in this model of radically decentralized schooling, would you have woke schools? Yeah, you would. But you'd also have conservative schools and math-oriented schools and arts-oriented schools and classically oriented schools and, radical schools. You'd have a whole multiplicity of things. And I think we have to get over our fear that leads to this sense that we need to control the education. We need to control families. We need to control how dollars are spent. Actually, no, you need to free families. You need to trust families. You need to understand that even if people make decisions that are different than you would like, actually the Declaration and the Constitution embedded in those values is the idea that you have to trust the American people. And that's what I'd like to see. And I know it pisses a lot of people off because it's a truly radical solution. But I think that's where we have to go in the 21st century. We don't have centralized, corporate structures and centralized needs like we did in the factory system of our economy. We have to move towards the decentralized model moving forward.
I agree with you 100% on the decentralization trend. I've been calling it a strategic disconnection, the end of the era of indiscriminate connection, whether that was complete globalism, whether that was the expansion of NATO all the way, whether that was the outreach personally that we all made on social media. All these indiscriminate connections have now led us down a path that now we have to socially distance. Right? We have to socially distance in our own lives. We have to socially distance economically, politically, militarily, and even in the schools and create a decentralized environment. But Karlyn, tell me, how do we coexist in a universe where we do provide an opportunity for all ideas to come forth, decentralized public school situations, where there's going to be agenda that we don't agree with and we may even find harmful. How do we coexist, and is it worth it to do it that way?
Well, I think that the reality is that, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Let's just all acknowledge that. It's going to
True.
get worse before it gets better. And the fact is that right now we're in a position where I think that the public schools are frankly beyond saving, because it's going to take at least an entire generation of training new teachers to replace all of the teachers that are already there. I mean, the education curriculums in college and universities are almost completely woke at this point. It is not possible to rescue them. And so the only viable solution to start chipping away at what the radical left has done to education in this country for the last 40 years is to start moving in this direction of, you get your conservative schools, you can still have your woke schools if you want. And then we have to hope that in the marketplace of ideas, the best ideas will ultimately win out when people feel like they have that choice. And I also think that giving people more options would help parents who we know are afraid of speaking up in their own school districts, afraid of speaking truth to power. Like, it gives them options to be able to pull their kids out. There's one man in New Hampshire. His name is Dan Richards. He's a CEO of a company here. He has been very much behind the effort for HB 544. And he got shouted down in a PTA meeting just a couple of weeks ago because he was raising questions about what his kids were being taught. And that's part of the reason why he's in this fight. And I wanted to mention one more thing. I actually have, I think one of the benefits of the Zoom classes taking place is not just that parents are going to see what their kids are learning, but frankly, just the other day, I got a video from an 8th grader in Fairfax County, Virginia, showing he recorded his entire class's social media unit. And I'm going to be putting that on my YouTube channel later today so that people can actually see directly how these children are being indoctrinated. And this student, God love him, he had watched YouTube channels like mine. He knew what to look for. And as soon as he saw the social justice unit creep up, he hit record on that Zoom, and now we can see exactly what they're doing.
That's incredible, because my kids' schools have these I'm not going to give the name, I almost did, but they have these programs where it's like they herd all the kids into these classrooms, and then they just start hammering with the courageous conversation stuff and the sit with your whiteness stuff and all the things that we know about. And I asked the assistant principal, I said, well, can I observe? And they said no.
Oh.
How is it possible that a public school can say that they're going to talk to my child without my being present, without my awareness of what's going on there? I'm not a lawyer. That strikes me as being odd. As a school leader, and this is what frustrates these principals and stuff when I talk to them, because I'm like, by the way, buddy, I've also been executive director of public charter schools, and guys like you reported to me, so I understand exactly what's going on here. And it frustrates them. Well, let me just finish this thought. And I just want to know, why is it not made public? Why is it not made public? I think it's because they know that it's not right. Corey?
Yeah, I would agree that the traditional system knows that a lot of families would not be okay with what's going on in the classroom. I mean, right when the remote learning started, there was a Philadelphia educator, I'm sure Christopher knows more about this, but he was tweeting about it on Twitter, saying that, our conservative parents might not be aligned with the things that are going on with remote learning, and they might freak out about all of these things that we're teaching them. And he got ratioed pretty hard on Twitter. I don't remember his name, but it was a Philadelphia public school educator. If you just look it up, you'll be able to find it. And it was a few months ago. So I think they know, and they don't want parents to understand what's going on in the classroom. But what's great is families are starting to understand that this year, finally. I mean, because they got to see a lot of what's going on in the remote settings, they're pushing back. And at the state level, we're seeing legislation for more transparency. For example, in Arizona, and I don't follow these bills as closely as the school choice bills, but in Arizona, their full Senate along party lines recently passed a bill to have all of the course materials put online in public schools so that families could actually see what's going on. It's not a perfect solution, because families, that they might say that they're doing a couple of things, and the worksheets might look this way, but then the teacher might be saying different things in the classroom. So it's not a perfect solution, but it's a little better. At least the families can see exactly what worksheets are being used and what type of curriculums being used. I would argue school choice is the better solution, even further than that, because it would just rely on reports of what the student's saying or what the family perceives about what to be going on in the classroom.
Yeah, I think I think they're both great solutions that should be worked on in tandem, because the reality is for the rest of our lifetime there will be public schools, and I think parents have a right to know what's being taught in them. And it's hard to get this material unless you are that kind of very aggressive parent that makes sure that you get it from your school. But two things. One is transparency is fantastic, because at least it creates a check where I can go and see, and then teachers will think twice before they maybe post the most outrageous lessons. But this is deliberate. I actually just reported on this exact question earlier this week. I obtained documents from Wake County, North Carolina. So not exactly a kind of Berkeley or Brooklyn, where they were holding a conference on launching a campaign against whiteness in educational spaces. And in the session minutes that I obtained through a whistleblower, the notes are very clear. I can read them to you. One teacher said, "How do you deal with parent pushback?" And the leaders of the session at Wake County Public Schools says, quote, "You can't let parents deter you from the work. White parents' children are benefiting from the system of white supremacy and are, quote, not learning at home about diversity, LGBTQ, race, etc. Any pushback," the teacher said, "is merely because white parents fear, quote, that they are going to lose something, and they find it, quote, hard to let go of their power and privilege." So school administrations in purple / kind of reddish states are explicitly telling teachers, you need to subvert parents, you need to hide the materials that you're teaching, and even when parents object, you need to ram this ideology down the throats of these kids, because we know better than parents and families. This is the attitude in public schools, and I think that it is it's not rare. It's actually institutionalized. In Wake County, they spend $1 million a year on anti-racism programs now.